Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, What Washington is Doing to Help During the COVID-19 Crisis. My name is Caprice Crawford, and I am the Education Manager here at the Home Furnishings Association, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Now, before we get started, I would like to go over a few basics for today's session. Now, this webinar will be recorded and will be made available to all attendees, and it will be posted on our website. Now, as you heard when you joined, you are in listen-only mode. Now, this means that all attendees except me and our speakers are muted. Now, although we can't hear you, we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat box you see on your webinar control panel. This control panel usually pops up on the right-hand side of your screen when you joined. We do want this to be interactive. Please ask questions. Now, only organizers can see your questions, so myself and Doug will be monitoring them as the webinar progresses, and our speakers will address all questions at the end of the presentation. Now, I would like to introduce HFA's Content Manager, Doug Clark, not Doug Clark, Doug Clark, C-L-A-R-K. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Caprice, and thanks to everyone who's attending this webinar. Everything is happening with lightning speed, and it's a heck of a thunderstorm. I'm in our High Point, North Carolina office, and just 1 week ago, the ACC tournament was underway in next door Greensboro. Pre-market organizers were soliciting for more attendees. The April market was still scheduled for April 25th or 29th, and all that changed the very next day, and a lot has changed since. And now members of our association are closing their doors in some states, and you all are facing some very difficult decisions. I want to, before I introduce Chris, our president, Jesus Capot, put out a statement today. You may have received it in an email. It's on our website, myhfa.org. And I just want to read a couple lines from that. Jesus writes, "Remember, you are not alone. Every retailer, every store is going through the same challenges. The advantage that you have over most others is that you are a member of the HFA. Now, more than ever, we need each other." And one of those advantages from a government relations perspective is our man in Washington, our representative, Chris Andresen. And Chris is working literally night and day to keep up with all the activity there. So Chris, let me turn it over to you to give us an update on what is happening this minute in our nation's capital to help American businesses and employees, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Doug, and thanks to everybody that has gotten on to this webinar today. As Doug mentioned right before, about 15 minutes ago, we were following the Senate tally. The Senate is currently voting on the House passed coronavirus package that came over this weekend, Sunday into Monday, and I haven't checked the vote tally. When we were looking, there were 52 yeses. Of course, they have to get to 60, and all signs pointed that's probably happened by now. But wanted to share that with you because there's been a lot of moving parts in the last few days, especially around that House passed vehicle. I can say that the senator sat on it for a couple of days. Some Republicans were not completely thrilled with it. I think even Senate Majority Leader McConnell mentioned, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." And ultimately, the feeling was this crisis is escalating by the day. Let's pass this. Well, it may not be what they would have written identically. It certainly covers a number of those key points. And let's move on to something we'll talk about in a lot more detail, this third package, which is going to be more focused on economic type stimulus activities and proposals that would potentially directly impact and help all of you as you try and operate your businesses in this uncertain environment. So of course, this is coming off of, it's now been almost 2 weeks that the House and Senate and President Trump signed an initial funding bill that really had to deal with research and agency monies to get some of the coronavirus testing efforts started. A key element I wanted to add here, because this has been consistent throughout, and it's something we'll talk about in relation to this third package that's upcoming. That first package already opened up some additional, obviously small authority within the Small Business Administration to provide loans to businesses that are impacted by this. You'll see there that they appropriated $1 billion. These funds are loan guarantees. So actually the authorities up to about $7 billion in this initial package. What I've heard throughout, as I mentioned, consistently from Democratic and Republican leaders has been the bulk of the fiscal stimulus is going to come through SBA. And so that's what we're continuing to see as these proposals are being considered. So I mentioned the bill that will be passed and signed by President Trump likely later today. Some of the key elements for the businesses on this call here, certainly it focuses a little bit more on the employee side, but these have impacts for your companies too. These paid family leave and paid sick leave provisions, they're mandated under this second package. Initially, House Democrats had hoped for these to be permanent. They were both sunsetted at the end of 2020. So these are paid family leave and paid sick leave provisions that are effective once this bill is, or I should say 15 days after this bill is signed, and they will go through the end of the year. One thing to note too, as negotiations were ongoing with Democrats and Republicans in the administration, each provision does include a 100% refundable tax credit for the business. So to the extent that you have employees, there's also a self-employed aspect of this as well. So if you are the sole owner and it's a family business and that sort of thing, that there are considerations for those types of situations as well. The federal government's going to pay for that for those leave provisions. I'll go into a little bit more in terms of what we see from a cash flow perspective, because it's not lost on Doug or myself or anybody else, quite frankly, here in DC, with respect to, yes, you're going to be able to, mandated to give this leave and pay these employees during this time, but your stores may not be open. Certainly business is going to be impacted negatively moving forward. So that's something to consider, absolutely. And this refundable tax credit, again, you get it when you file your taxes, which happens at the end of the year. So there is a little bit of a float there that Congress is trying to come back through that SBA loan program to shore up as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Another impact to this whole thing in terms of increased unemployment insurance, anecdotally, I was working with a group up in Massachusetts statewide. They said in Massachusetts in February, the whole month of February, they had 17,000 unemployment insurance claims. On Monday of this week, they had 20,000 in one day. So the group, some of the other groups that I work with are on the workforce side, and what I'm hearing is that a lot of these unemployment insurance systems are essentially crashing under the weight of all the folks that are trying to access these benefits at this point in time. The other piece, and you heard the speaker talk about this, is testing, of course. Basically, the federal government's going to cover the cost of all these tests, no matter who your insurer is or if you have insurance at all. So those are some of those key aspects. But again, going through, as I said, this is expected to be signed in the next few hours, and then we'll turn to the third package. As I mentioned, one of the things that I've been talking to leadership about is the impact, especially to small, but small, medium, and large businesses, because this is a huge cost, these new paid sick and family leave provisions. So what we've seen from Treasury, especially, is that they're working around the clock to ensure maximum flexibility for your business when it comes to these provisions. So what they're doing is they're allowing you to use money that you've already paid to the IRS to pay these wages. And then, of course, if you don't have enough to do that based on what you've paid to the IRS in taxes, they're going to give you the money to cover those. So, as I said, this is such a fluid and rapid situation. There's a lot of things happening in real time, some of which don't always make the headline, but that was something I think that was a key piece for you all to know. And then certainly, look, we've had long debates in Congress about paid sick leave. As I said, Democrats wanted that to be a permanent provision. This is what it came down to in terms of the intent. They were trying to provide benefits for both the employers and the employees. And I think that obviously that Treasury assistance is one of those aspects, and then we'll get to the expanded small business loans as part of this third package. But this is something that's evolved. I can say that the Senate Republicans kicked around all kinds of different ideas, add something to this to send it back to the House. Ultimately, they decided to pass it, move on to this next set. And this is where the more direct economic stimulus comes in. And as each day passes, this gets heavier, right? I mean, this gets more expensive. I mean, we've heard figures from 750 billion, 850 billion, now over $1 trillion. And this is, quite frankly, in these types of situations, when it's a disaster like this, whether it's natural or this type of pandemic, this is what we see. Knowing that Senate Republicans weren't overly thrilled with this second package from the House and kind of having to take it, they're taking a very deliberate approach to this third package. You'll see there's 4 task groups that have been established. An obvious quick turnaround. They were essentially given 48 hours from yesterday, focused on health, tax, small business, and industry proposals. Important for this group, just in some of the work that through Doug and the Government Relations Committee we've been working on. Heading the small business task group is Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. He's the chairman of the Small Business Committee and somebody that we've been engaged with directly, both here in DC, but also in the state, with some participation in some of his small business impact roundtables with one of our top issues. So these task groups are meeting early and often. I also know that on the health side, Richard Burr from North Carolina, obviously another key constituency for the furniture industry generally, and a longtime champion, is one of the leaders in that group. So there's still a lot to be done. We'll get through what kind of considerations are being held on both sides. For what we know right now, obviously the Federal Reserve, you've seen lately, and I mentioned about some of the Treasury actions, they're trying to do whatever they can to open up liquidity and bring confidence back during this time. One of the other pieces that was actually formally written up today by Treasury and IRS was the delay in tax filings. So obviously for individuals and corporations, April 15th is the deadline. They've now put that in writing that there's a 90-day delay for those businesses, especially those with up to $10 million that they owe. So I know that that's been a significant measure. It's also done for individuals up for $1 million. So, and that could encompass, some of the folks on this call, some of the smaller C corporations. So S corporations. So we're following this. All this is being done. I mean, I know that there's several other acronyms that I've seen that the Department of Treasury has enacted or bypassed to make sure that they're doing whatever they can. So they're trying to cut through any sort of regulatory burden that they would have to use some of those tools. But of course, there are certain things that they need to lean on Congress for. And I can say this, just in talking with folks on the administration earlier today, the National Economic Council, they are looking at everything. And so this is really important. They're really, as this has gone on, I would say, obviously, as you all can imagine, the wish list in Congress, the wish list for industry is just getting larger, which is why I noted that growing figure at the top. This first piece has been talked about for a long time. Well, it's been used before. It was used back in the Obama years in 2011, 2012. This payroll tax cut. It has not. This idea has not been met with open arms in Congress, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, it's really expensive. The president floated canceling the payroll tax to the end of 2020. You can see there, that's almost $1 trillion right there. More recently, I think the administration, from what I had heard, had pared that down to maybe get through the summer, cancel it through August. This is obviously, a significant tax cut for businesses, but it's something that, again, on its nature, would be temporary, and then, of course, optically and practically, Congress would then be raising taxes once that would go back to where it was. So that's always, as we all know, some of the issues that we've dealt with over the years, always a difficult proposition. Part of the other piece that's come into this in recent days, we heard some things floated on Capitol Hill. Certainly, direct cash payments to taxpayers. And what the initial response has been from the administration is, initially we would have a $250 billion fund to go out April 6th, and then there'd be another $250 billion available. I know I put if needed there, but obviously, I think based on where we are and where we see this thing heading, it would go through. You can't really dangle that in front of people and then take it away. I think the date I saw there was May 18th. So those are two areas there. I know that certainly that was something that Secretary Mnuchin pitched to Senate Republicans yesterday. Again, met with, there's some folks in the conference that like that idea. It's certainly on their list of proposals to consider. Others that are not as keen and would rather do more on the tax side. I don't know exactly where this is going to fall out, but it has gotten increased support within the administration, obviously directly from the president in recent days. Obviously, we can all understand, I typically on these presentations, I'll have a political component. I don't really have one today, but politically speaking, with the economy, that's something that the president cherishes, and it has been since day one. We know that working with the administration. So that's why I'm saying here, basically anything's on the table. I mean, we heard that this initial proposal, $1,000 per person from Mitt Romney, who of course is no friend of the White House, especially right now. And that's something that they've kind of done up in terms of a model. So it's really all hands on deck, and all these ideas are being floated and kicked around, trying to figure out which pieces fit into this broader package. So you can see there, just based on the numbers we were talking about before, if you were to do, call that the direct fiscal stimulus at $500 billion, and then some measure of the payroll tax cut, which I've heard the lowest they would go would be like 500 billion. That's already $1 trillion right there. We haven't talked about some of these others. So of course, getting to some of the more industry specific issues here, and this really is getting a little bit complicated and almost overwhelming, because what we have here is some significantly impacted industries. You know about the airlines, cruise ships, hotel, hospitality. I was talking before the call to Doug. The Restaurant Association has said that they're going to lose, the restaurant business is going to lose about $225 billion in this crisis. There was initially this idea that these funds would be given out in grants to specifically the airlines and others. There was some pushback again on that notion from Democrats and Republicans, just in the effect of course, we're coming off of, we're about a decade plus out from the bank bailout, the auto bailout, and there was certainly some folks that disagree with those positions. And so what Treasury's done is they've created a secure lending fund within Treasury itself. So Treasury would actually be the one that would run and monitor this fund that the airline specific would be able to use. But then they would also open up a separate fund, same sort of structure, that could be available to other impacted industries. We were talking before as well. I mean, like I said, there's all these figures being thrown around by every major industry group here, which is, look, that's what we have to do at this point in time. But we've been staying in close contact with the National Retail Federation, certainly involved with them on many of these issues, and they've taken a little bit of a different tack in terms of, look, from their perspective, they're just saying, we're going to need your help, and we're expecting you to be there for us when we do come for that ask. So again, this is free flowing, moving information. Some of the numbers again are staggering, but it's definitely something that the administration is sensitive to moving forward. And from what I've heard from Senate leadership folks, this idea of direct grants is off the table, but they're certainly more open to some sort of situation where you have a loan that's then paid back over time. And again, we saw that with the banks during the 2008 crisis.
So speaking of fast moving, Chris, sorry, but we just got a message from Rob Davis, who's one of the members of our Government Relations Action Team, saying the Senate has just passed $1 trillion bill. Are you tracking that?
$1 trillion. They already passed. Oh, I mean that's something. The bill that they just passed, again, to the extent that I was tracking it before the call, that second package is a little bit over $100 billion. The $1 trillion piece, I was not aware that was being passed right away, because they were still trying to figure that out. But that is this next package that we're talking about right now, and all these elements and how they would then add up. But yeah, I mean, that would be remarkably that would be a remarkable piece, and this webinar would be well timed if all that were going on at the same time. The other piece to this that again would be dramatically expanded, and I mentioned before at the top, these small business loans. So initially, I'll say when I talked to Doug probably Monday, I can't remember if it was Friday or Monday, they were kicking around amounts of like 10% of this, like 30 to 50 million. Now we're up to 300 billion for these small business loans. And again, these would be essentially to help folks cover payroll and anything that they would need during this period of time. You can see some of the terms there. Again, I think a lot of this is still to be determined. One of the other issues is demand. There's going to be obviously extremely high demand for this right now, and in the future. So as part of that first package that passed, that $1 billion in SBA loans, Congress did give them about $20 million to administer the program, which means that they can hire more people. Now, whether or not where those people are going to actually be stationed to process these applications and things, I don't know. But there will be a huge crunch. You can see some of those terms there. That's certainly something that I know that there's broad agreement here within Congress, especially on the small business side, making sure that because I mean, inside the government, really, you've got Treasury and you've got SBA that really have a lot of the loan authority, and so, but this small business piece, I would almost book that one, as something that would be included in this broader package, assuming, as Rob says, I mean, it could have already moved through. That was faster than I would have expected right here. But certainly, I would say that there are any number of other considerations and conditions that are going to be added to this. And to the extent that the Democrats and Republicans on the Senate side are talking just yet, my understanding is that that's not happening right now. But to get this thing done, and again, my understanding was that they were looking to do this broader trillion, I was saying $1 to $1.5 trillion package sometime in the next week, getting it done.
I think you're right. You're right about that. So just a correction on that. It was the House bill that was passed on the Senate floor, okay, as you were tracking, with 90 votes.
Oh, 90. See, that's 90 votes. So that's a huge deal. So you can see there, when I wrote in here some Republicans, it's a small number. I mean, we're talking small, limited opposition. I know on the House bill, when it was initially passed, there were 40 Republicans that voted against it. On the House side, you had some folks voting against it on the Senate side, of course, but you still have healthy margins, and my assumption is that's going to be signed by the president, I believe, sometime this afternoon. So things are moving swiftly. These are some of the elements that we're seeing that would be then incurred in this next economic stimulus package. I'm already hearing rumblings of a fourth package, and I think, again, as all of us would say, we would hope that wouldn't be necessary. But just based on what we know today and what we expect the rest of the week to be, we are going to be looking at another package. So I know that folks were looking at this second package with an eye towards this third package. What can we do? The reality is, when you get into these big numbers and big spending, they're trying to get it right. And so that's why over the next day or so, we're going to have this more deliberate conversation within Senate Republicans, who by and large were kind of held out of the House package. That was really Speaker Pelosi negotiating with her counterpart Kevin McCarthy, and then the administration, Secretary Mnuchin. And this one seems to be more driven by Senate Republicans, at least in the interim, as we look to roll this out. One of the other pieces that I know that National Retail Federation has been pushing, and certainly as you saw, there's a task group for tax proposals. One of the things that has been floated that we as an association have been working on for many months, and perhaps it's been a year plus now, was some of these technical corrections from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017. So this provision is holding steady out there. I know that it's on the list for Senate Republicans as they look at these tax proposals as a way to get money back to retailers, and in NRF's case and in our case, they're looking at Treasury allowing for amended filings to get some of this money back. I still don't know. With everything on the table, obviously anything's possible. Certainly, it's something that the administration holds as one of its top tax priority items. The question is going to be, again, at the bottom there, you see the political price has been high. Republicans hadn't been willing to meet it, although now we're in a bona fide crisis. So the reality is it's still out there among one of those discussion points, and we'll just have to see how that all boils down. I mean, I think that we can make, to the extent we can make this a small business driven conversation, an issue, then the better chance we have at including this in a broader, third economic stimulus package. One of the other pieces that's been floated, I know that there's certainly some impacts here on trade questions, of course, is with China. We've got this phase one trade deal that's kind of been put on hold for right now, although the sides had been trying to figure out a date to talk about that and moving forward. Certainly there's been some Senate Republicans and others who have been urging the administration, along with National Retail Federation, Business Roundtable, all the big business associations here in DC, to take the tariffs off that have been imposed on imports from China. Even today, the president has really continued to block that. He's, the president likes to keep these things compartmentalized in different phases, and that has not entered into his thinking. So as far as I know, there's a big push in Congress to get some tariff relief, understanding what kind of economic effects that would have. However, that's been met with pretty fierce opposition. I know from Peter Navarro in the White House, who's one of the chief trade advisors to the president, but also with President Trump himself. As we know in his negotiating tactics and style, he's looking to negotiate on pretty much anything, but he likes to do it in a position of strength. Right now, with the economy the way that it is, the administration's not willing to open that up. Just given that we're a little bit in a free fall right now. That being said, what I wanted to also point out is, mentioned at the top of the call, we were on a call this morning with the National Economic Council, and batting around some of these ideas and trying to understand exactly what they're considering. And what we were told was, and I could say that we were told this several times, is that they're open to listening to any company, any association. However, what they want is concrete data. They want really concrete, sophisticated data to back anything up. And they apologize for keep going back to that, but that's what whenever we were engaging in this conversation, that was the immediate fallback point. And so that's why when I was talking about some of these figures, when it came to impact to various industries, I'm hesitant, of course, to put out specific numbers that we don't have the data to represent. Just understanding that the impact's going to be, enterprise threatening. So that's where things stand. There is an open line of communication within the White House on these things. They're focused on, obviously, key industries, but also understand the retail segment is suffering and will continue to suffer, especially if we head into a more prolonged economic downturn or recession. So, to Doug's point at the beginning, we're making sure that all of these things, all the impacts are known to folks on the Hill. Obviously, Congress doesn't always work with efficiency. In some cases like this, they can. We've seen that again over the course of this week and the weekend, and I would expect there to be a pretty robust conversation going back and forth with perhaps a Senate proposal on this next economic stimulus package to come out, sometime Thursday evening, Friday morning, talking about it through the weekend, and then hopefully, like I said, passing it and getting it signed by the president next week. Underlying all these votes and considerations is that, right now the House is out of session. It's in recess. The only way it can pass something is if there's 100% unanimity. As you can imagine, with that $1 trillion bill, making its way from the Senate side, if that would be the case, there would, I mean, we can almost guarantee there would be, so that the House would want to, what they're trying to do, the talks that I've had, is they're trying to negotiate things as far as possible so that they have it done. They could come in for a vote and then leave again. And I would say that's both on the House and the Senate side. They're looking to make these votes, get these policies out there with as little disruption to themselves and exposure to themselves and their staffs as possible. We've heard all kinds of rumors in recent days. I won't speculate on that in terms of how long they would be out, but just know that the April schedule for the House and Senate was rather light anyway because of Easter. They had a 2-week recess at the beginning of the month. There was supposed to be a Democratic retreat and a Republican retreat. The Democratic retreat I know has been canceled. I don't know about the Republican retreat yet. Maybe they're still holding on to that. But as I talked about a fourth package, just understanding how things are moving here, my guess is, from what I've just taken over the last week or so, is that once we get this third package, there may be a pause in the action, hoping that they can get some of that liquidity out there and figure out what effects that would have in the immediate term for businesses and consumers alike. And then
Well,
we
let's
would
go. Yeah, let's go back.
something
Let's go
else.
back to what we've got now, because we've gotten a lot of questions in, and
Yeah.
want to get to them right on cue. So, small business administration loans, employers who employ 500 or fewer. So you employ 600. What have you got?
Well, you're going to have more applicability within, say, the Department of Treasury for some of those secure lending funds than you would at SBA at this point in time. I think that's what we can say, and that's like I mentioned before, that's been the main focus of Congress in a bipartisan way. So if you have 600 employees, yeah, you're going to be too big for that SBA pot. But then we would turn to the Treasury, assuming that they're able to, set up these lending funds within there. And that, like we said in there, they're talking about $250 billion worth of money in there for Treasury.
Okay, and we should note that there are some states that are setting up their own loan pools, and so it behooves retailers in various states to check with their own state government to see what's available. We have a resources page at myhfa.org. Go there. We're constantly updating that. We're going to put a link to the National Governors Association, which in turn has links to all the states. And so their responses are very important. There's a lot that's happening at the state level.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so can Congress establish, or will Congress establish, some retroactive date to go back to cover expenses, or is this going to be expenses going forward? What if you've already had employees who've been quarantined and you've paid for their sick leave or vacation time or whatever? Is there some provision to cover those expenses retroactively?
Yes, and I think that's part of the reason why this was the coverage of that was made into a refundable tax credit, so that it covers any portion of this year. So it's not just on the effective date. It actually will go back to when you file your taxes on those paid leave areas. You're going to be able to have that covered. So
Okay.
that will cover all of that.
Will there be a payroll tax cut?
I would say no. I thought significantly, of course, with the package we saw that was sent up to Congress today by the administration, a payroll tax cut was not included on that. So I think they've heard the message from Congress that that is not something that they're interested in.
Here's a question that is really talking about the kind of the chain reaction of economic distress. What if retailers just stop paying manufacturers? And it kind of goes to this whole idea of, what the dependency that we all have on one another. And for example, there are questions about insurance claims, and is this something that you may have some kind of business coverage for? And we've actually got a link to something that AJ Gallagher produced on this that you all might take a look at
Mm.
on our website, that's covering some of these questions. But if suppliers can't pay, or you can't pay your suppliers and they can't pay their suppliers, is who's backing everything up to make everyone whole all the way down the whole chain?
Well, yeah, it comes down to, really, in this case, it's going to be Treasury, and it's going to be the Small Business Administration right now. To the extent of the government, I've heard, and certainly one of the other pieces that the NRF brought up in their letter to the administration today was that exact point. What do we do with the supply chain impacts along the way? It comes to other types of payments, rent, healthcare, all these things, of course, are still coming due. The federal government's doing what it can with respect to those entities that it controls, but certainly, a lot of times you may be paying rent in that case to a private entity. So there's going to be, I mean, I don't know exactly how it works out, but the reality is the way that this is being envisioned is that those specific supply chain business costs would be something that would then be applied to these Treasury or SBA funds. The question is, again, the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets, and the deeper this cut is, the more expensive it gets. And this is exactly why, we don't know exactly what these consequences will be. This is why I believe that we're still looking at another package after this. Once Congress works on this third one, assuming it gets passed and signed, in about 7 to 10 days, what impact did that have? And then what impact do we see moving forward? Especially if we're taking this, as the administration says, in 15-day bites, 15-day increments. What do we do? And certainly your businesses are operated on a daily segment, right? So to the extent that folks have stories, Doug, certainly I know we've asked, but we would have an open door for people to share that, so that we can then get those stories to congressional leadership, their individual representatives or senators, because that's what's really, to the White House's point, that's what's really driving this. And so to the extent that we can give concrete examples of, hey, this is a situation that's going on and it's affecting this industry segment, then we're back into figuring out how to get that one solved.
Yeah, good point, and absolutely. We want to hear from our members what they're coping with and how they're dealing with this. And we are talking to a lot, and they're telling some heartbreaking stories, and stories about really impossible positions that they're being put in, even by their governors. I wrote a post yesterday specific to Pennsylvania, but many other states are in the same position, where governors are strongly urging non-essential businesses to close their doors. Well, that's not an order. Some of these governors are giving orders to restaurants, close their dining rooms, or orders to theaters to close their doors, whereas they're urging other retailers, if they're non-essential, what's essential and what's not. We're actually wrestling with that, and we may be forming a position to kind of argue that in some ways, in communities large and small, all businesses are essential, right? I mean, which business is not essential in providing paychecks and paying taxes, right, and supporting a lot of community organizations that all of our members do? So, not only do they have to grapple with these suggestions or recommendations from governors, but they have to deal with, really challenging business conditions. And so, one of our questions, not really a question is, but we need to ask Congress to not close our businesses, small or large. How about a forbearance agreement for banks to back off?
Hmm.
Tell
Right.
the banks to back off.
Right. And I would say that is something that's being discussed at the federal level on the banks specifically. As it comes to a national policy or any sort of recommendation for businesses to close, the administration is. I can tell you this, Tony Fauci is somebody that's been advocating for that, some sort of a nationwide lockdown procedure. Um, that's why you saw in recent days that CDC guidance come down from 50 to 10 as sort of a compromise. I don't believe that we're going to get to that point at a national level. Certainly, in your state, locally in your community, depending on what those requirements and orders are, what punishments there are. I mean, I think that you have to make an individual decision. How at risk are you and your employees and your customers to this outbreak? What services, to Doug's point, are you providing when it comes to paychecks for people to afford their own living situation and take care of their families? I think that's an obviously legitimate case to be made. And so, but I know that this is getting difficult and it's kind of cascading, right? Because we see, we see San Francisco have a shelter-in-place ordinance for 6 of its counties, and then that kind of goes into many other places across the country. We've seen that in recent days with this particular pandemic, is that sort of sweeping type of action. I know here in DC there was a closure effort on restaurants, and somebody pushed back on that, one of the restaurant groups, and gosh, they really got there was some real pushback from consumers and customers on them, and they receded and went with the mayor's suggestion. So I think it's a case by case basis. We could sit here amongst ourselves and make the pitch for us to be essential. And I would just encourage, and I've got contacts here, as I was telling Doug, with National Governors Association, Association of Counties, League of Cities, who I've just been touching base with to try and help coordinate all facets of this, whether it's federal, state, local. And again, to those individual stories, if you have them, send them over to us, and we can get them to the folks that can hopefully give us some relief.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but following up on this thread, will there be some national consistency to this? Will the U.S. Secretary of Labor issue rules to exempt small businesses, say fewer than 50 employees, from these kinds of requirements? When it just if you have to shut down, if you're that small, are you going to pull out of this? So,
Right. Odds
what
are
what
against you at that point. I know that was specific to that paid family leave provision and the bill that just passed while we were on this call from the House. The Secretary of Labor does have the authority to exempt businesses with fewer than 50 people. Whether or not they're going to come out with a national decree on that, I have not heard that. I've spoken with the folks at the Department of Labor in recent days. Just to get on their radar. I know that they're working over 24/7 on this as well. So again, that's one of those issues. If you're struggling, get us that story and we can get it to the folks over at DOL as they're considering these types of waivers and things and these decisions.
or maybe your representative or senator can do that. So
Absolutely.
one question from one of our members in Mulberry, Florida, who talked with Senator Rick Scott today, is what can we ask Senator Scott to do?
Right.
Well, that's one thing, but what else? What would you ask any senator right now, Chris, if you had his ear or her ear?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think that it's the ability for any sort of federal response to be flexible, right? I mean, we're all dealing with this just like these lawmakers are in real time. We don't know what the end point is. We don't know when this pain for your business and your employees and your customers is going to end. So to the extent, and I think to this point in time, there has been greater flexibility to the point that we can maintain that moving forward. And then the ability, again, to keep working on this. We've had, assuming we get through a third, we're going to need more opportunities to come back. For Senator Scott, certainly some of these tax proposals that are out there for businesses to apply, to your point, Doug, initially retroactively, so that businesses could amend their tax filings, that some of them may already be done to get some of this money back. That would also be extremely helpful. But we're going to need, the reality is we're just going to need, you hate to say it, but we need more money. We're going to need more liquidity in those funds, probably at the SBA and the Treasury Fund. And the more we can do it up front, the less we have to come back for later.
Yeah. So here's more of a micro question from somebody who operates stores in Alabama. Should we remain open, keep our stores open in rural areas? And I talked to one of our members, a very small member up in Maine today, the same question. And also asking about our delivery teams. Should we keep sending delivery teams into 3 to 8 homes per day? And what I've heard from members on that question is just talk to your customers and ask your customers what they're comfortable with. What do they want you to do? Would they rather come and pick up the furniture? Would they rather you put it in their carport or their garage? Or are they okay if your delivery men are wearing gloves to carry it into the home? Talk to your customers.
And I would say anecdotally, I was helping a neighbor of mine out with a telephone issue the other day, and we called Verizon for him, and they said they had to call a service repairman, and they said, we just need to ask you a question. Have you tested positive, or you've been around anybody that's tested positive for coronavirus? And, so Verizon's still sending texts out to your home to service things. So I am, from my position, especially in rural communities where the economic impact, again, will be magnified, I would go with what your customers are telling you, what your employees are telling you. If your employees are saying, hey, listen, we don't want to show up to work today, whether they're sick, somebody they know is sick, they're scared, that's a different consideration. But if you have people that want to work and want to sell, you have delivery drivers that want to deliver. From what I know, there's no federal rules against that right now. Certainly making those considerations, as Doug said, I think is smart. I mean, my gosh, around here, the businesses are still open. They're just being, ultra flexible and doing things a little bit differently. And I would think that that as furniture retailers, we could do that too. And the reality is, if people are going to be in their homes, they're going to want their furniture, right? They're going to need this this service that we're providing. So my advice would be right now to stay up and continue serving your market unless your customers or employees are telling you otherwise.
Yeah, and that's a good point, an important point. I talked to one of our members yesterday who, in Pennsylvania, where there was the recommendation that they close, and they didn't think necessarily it was necessary, but they did, and they had customers come pick up at their warehouse. They weren't comfortable having their delivery trucks out on the streets where people might see that and and think they weren't abiding by the governor's recommendation. So it's you just have to make decisions based on your circumstances. So here's a big question, Chris. None of this really addresses the real problems effectively. Are they going to look more deeply into the real problems that are imminent? Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it could be anything from medically that this is going to get a whole lot worse, or economically that it's going to get a whole lot worse. But I guess the question is, what are the really big issues that need to be addressed?
Right. I mean, look, this is not going to be breaking news, but Congress is not very good at being proactive. And certainly I think they would be the first to admit that. They can be good at being reactive. And so that's what from my perspective, what I said earlier in terms of whatever it is that we're facing moving forward. I mean, certainly you talked about, medically, we can see some of the risks there. I think economically, all of us, you're on this call making time for this, for that very reason. We see what could happen. Some of them are hypothetical, some are happening right now. But the impacts of this, last 2 or 3 weeks moving forward are going to be devastating. We know that. That's why I think that it's Congress's job, for the most part, and I would say that I would much rather put that faith in industry, businesses like yours, to help get us back on track. And so that's why I think that the way that this is being structured would be to give businesses that amount of capital to be able to continue running, to get themselves back to where they can survive, and then hopefully get to a point where then you can build on that. But right now, I don't think we can expect Congress to be proactive and look forward and try and solve a problem that's going to be coming down the road, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months from now. That's why they're setting up this money. I mean, we all know these big federal programs, there's going to be all kinds of rules and timelines and delays, most likely, especially because, your businesses are suffering now and have been for 1 to 2, 3, 4 weeks. So what do we do? I think that right now we'll look to Congress to don't hold these things up, get some of the money out there that folks will need, whether it's for the business or employees, what have you. And then hopefully the medical situation, again, if you're looking at that, look, we know that the way that this has gone in other countries, our numbers are going to go up as more people test positive, et cetera. Let's make sure that we can get everybody healthy, confident again, and going out of their house, and make sure the businesses are able to survive that period of time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of period of time, we've got an idea about a period of time of a month. Skip a month. Allow people not to make a car payment, rent payment, mortgage payment, no additional interest charge, no negative consequences.
Right.
Give everybody a chance to grab a breath for a month, allow some additional funds when this is over, a true public and private partnership.
Right. I mean, I think, look, as I mentioned, the federal government can only do so much as it relates to that. To the extent that you have a federally backed mortgage, my understanding there's going to be some relief there. Whether it's anything to do with HUD and some of the things they've had with evictions or late payments, they're going to be putting a delay there. So the federal government, to the extent it can, doesn't need Congress to do some of these things. They're putting a break there. Obviously, we talked about the tax filing piece. There's been some relief that's been given there, and that delay, both for individuals and businesses. And again, from what I've heard and seen, to the extent that you're working with your creditors and your landlords and those folks, I mean, it's easy for me to say sitting here, but talk to them, because my understanding is that there is much more relief out there. Obviously, the banks have been in DC the last couple of days telling everybody that would listen that they're great, they're liquid, they've got all kinds of cash, they're willing to loan. So if that's the case, then they can give you a month off. For any sort of payment. So I would think that obviously the federal government, from what I've said, is trying to ensure maximum flexibility. They're doing what they can, but it's going to take, there's going to be some private impacts too that will need to be worked out.
Yeah. Along those lines, another question: why should capital be earning money when everyone else can't work? Can we ask questions like that in a business association? These are extraordinary times that draw questions like that.
It's something that certainly those types of the debates have come up, and whether it's been government shutdowns and that things haven't passed. But yeah, these folks, there's been all kinds of proposals dealing with Congress and what it should be doing. In this case, I'm hopeful. Again, just understanding the gravity of the problem, seeing what's being discussed, so they can move swiftly, get some of the money out into the hands of the business owners and the employees, and weather the storm, and then hopefully recover.
Okay, more questions. We don't have time to get to them now. Send them to me, D. Clark, C-L-A-R-K, at myhfa.org. We'll make these slides available. Chris, thanks so much for your time. Thanks to everybody who participated. Sorry we didn't have more time for more questions. They've kept coming in as we've gone, and we'll try to do something like this again. Please communicate with us.
Absolutely.
We'll communicate with you.
Great. Well, thank you,
Okay.
everyone. And a copy of this video this webinar will be sent to you along with the slides in the next couple of hours or first thing in the morning. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and have a great day.